thank you again, and thank you for coming to this consultation. Before I stood up, I was going to ask those who live here where the court of justice court is, but anyway I decided to look for it on the map, but I only found food courts nearby. So. But where is the courtroom here? Is it close? A local court? You can walk from here and have, I don't know how many of you have actually been inside a courtroom? You do, for cases. But usually the cases that you probably have seen are cases between one person against another, or maybe in criminal cases, the government against someone accused of a crime. And I don't know whether you've actually followed a case in court from beginning to end. I know that in many countries, many third world and many developing countries, those cases can take very long. As a lawyer, I was trained as a lawyer, and of course, it's a usual joke, whether in New York or in Manila, or I suppose in Fiji, that sometimes you inherit cases from your parents, and that's what sends you to school. It takes so long. Justice delayed is justice denied, and we've heard that before. But imagine if there are hundreds or even thousands of cases spread over 40 years or even longer. How many of those cases do you think will ever be filed in court? And let's say 20 of those cases are filed in court. How long do you think it will take to resolve those cases? In many developing countries, we don't really have the luxury of litigating, of using courts to resolve disputes. But the other problem is that some disputes cannot be resolved in court. Questions such as truth, for example, who is telling the truth? You could swear an oath in court, and you're compelled to tell the truth. You'll be punished if you don't. But there are other questions that are more difficult to talk about in terms of truth or falsehood. So there are disputes, there are cases that may not necessarily be best dealt with in a courtroom. And so the work I do, it's been mentioned that I work for a international non-government organization called the International Center for Transitional Justice, ICTJ. The TJ part, transitional justice, is all about justice after a transition. A transition from what? In the work we do, and as I will mention in some of the countries that I can talk about later, the transition is usually a transition from armed conflict, from a war, or a transition from authoritarian rule, which can be a dictatorship, or in some cases just repressive government for a long time. And in some cases it can be a transition because a leader transfers power, a leader dies, or a leader resigns, is forced to resign from office, or an election takes place and a government that was in power for a long time, and that stay in power perhaps has issues of legitimacy, for example, finally loses an election and concedes, and a transition takes place. So much of the work we do in the field of transitional justice is dealing with grievances from the past before the transition and trying to find ways to resolve those grievances, offer some forms of justice for victims of human rights violations during the period prior to the transition or during the period of armed conflict. In some cases, pursue accountability against individuals, against institutions, against organizations for their role in abuses in the past, in human rights violations, in crimes committed during conflict. And in some of the examples I will talk about, there are also those who are interested in reconciliation as an outcome of the transition. And perhaps that's one of the things we will discuss last, because it's a very difficult thing to discuss. So in the countries we work in, the country emerging after a transition may or may not have functioning courts. In many of the country, one of the earliest work I did that relates to transitional justice was in East Timor, and that's not very far from here. In East Timor, when I went there in 1999, right after the referendum for independence in East Timor, there was violence. People were fighting each other, those who were for independence and those who wanted integration into Indonesia, because Timor was part of Indonesia, even if illegally. There were a lot of people displaced. I flew on a helicopter, I could see all the blue tarps all over, and blue tarps are really provided by the United Nations or International Organization for Migration, IOM, for those who are forced to flee their homes and live under tents. More people fled across the border to Indonesia, and the only buildings left intact that were not burnt down, the only government buildings left intact was really just the governor's house, which is where I stayed together with soldiers from Australia that had sent soldiers, and I was there in a different capacity, not where I'm working now, but I was there, as you mentioned, I was there when I was still working as a Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Philippines, and my role was to determine whether the Philippines would lead a peacekeeping force in East Timor, which I had to assess. And so, assessing it, the Philippines led several countries, including Australia, took command of a peacekeeping force in East Timor until stability came back. There was no government in East Timor for a while. It was the UN that was essentially the government in East Timor. And one of the things that the United Nations mission in East Timor did was to establish a truth commission. They called it, in English, it was called the Commission on Truth, Justice, and Reception. The word reception is a little interesting, but what is even more interesting is the Portuguese translation, because it's actually more precise. In Portuguese, acolhimento, to welcome back. So it was a commission for truth, justice, and to welcome back. Who were they trying to welcome back? The people of East Timor who still wanted to stay with Indonesia. Now you have a new country, but there are people who did not want a new country. They wanted to be part of Indonesia. And they were afraid that if they came back across the border, that they would be killed, or they would be detained, or they would be punished for their beliefs. So this Truth Commission was established to try to let them know that they would be welcome back. And so that's one of the characteristics of a truth commission. It is designed, or it should be designed, to reflect the conditions of the country, the political situation in the country that is being addressed by establishing a truth commission. Which is why in Timor, the idea of truth and justice came with the idea of welcoming back. You don't design a generic truth commission. You design it based on the conditions of the country. But what is a truth commission? I think we can start the slide. A truth commission, the word itself uses the word commission, right? So it's not a court, and I think that's a very important distinction. And you can ask later on whether there's a role for courts in all of this. Oh, that's a different one. Truth commission is not a court. So there is no judge that decides cases in a truth commission. But like a court, a truth commission is official. It is official in the sense that it is established by the state, by the government. Now, there are truth commissions in the world that are not official, created by civil society, by NGOs, by ordinary people, and not necessarily created officially by the government. But here we're talking about an official body, a truth commission created by the state. A truth commission, to be effective, must be independent. Independent from whom? Independent from the political leaders who are in control of government. Now, of course, they create the Truth Commission. As Minister Sashi said, Parliament passed a resolution to create a Truth Commission, but that's different from controlling a Truth Commission. So a Truth Commission is official, it is not a court, it must be independent, and its role is really to listen and acknowledge those who may have been victims of human rights violations, other types of abuses, those who have grievances related to a past period of political violence. Now, I emphasize political violence because there are other forms of violence. There's the ordinary violence from crimes. There's violence caused by nature. Natural disasters can be very violent. The difference between political violence and crime is that crime happens almost every day. And we have courts to deal with crimes. However, of course, if crimes rise to the level where they happen on a scale that courts and police can no longer deal with, then maybe a truth commission is necessary. But we are talking really of political violence in a country, and then the country emerges from transition. So this is an example from Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, at the end of the war between the government and Tamil separatist forces, that lasted for decades, on and off, right? And one of the largest numbers of human rights violations committed there was enforced disappearances. So many people, not just combatants, but ordinary activists, ordinary people, were being disappeared by the opposing armed groups in Sri Lanka. And so disappearances was one of the violations that needed to be focused on after the transition in Sri Lanka. So the government created several commissions. And one of them was the Lessons Learned Commission in Sri Lanka. Another was the Commission to Find the Disappeared. The problem with the Lessons Learned Commission in Sri Lanka was that it wasn't really independent. It was controlled by the Prime Minister. He appointed people directly and they were reporting to him rather than as an independent body. On the other hand, the commission that deals with disappearances has had some more significant accomplishment, and so they were able to document some of the disappearances. They have been undertaking exhumations to try to identify whether bodies that they find are in fact people who were disappeared. So there are various ways to design a truth commission, but the idea is to listen, to hear, to acknowledge, rather than to find those who are guilty or determine who should be punished. That isn't the role of a truth commission. That's the role of courts. It doesn't mean that truth commissions have no role in that. It just means that a truth commission's primary role really is to listen, to hear what people went through in the past, to listen to them in an official capacity, and more than just a set of people listening to someone testify or appear before the commission, to provide a platform so that this person appearing before the Truth Commission can be heard not just by the commissioners, and I'll show you an example of what that looks like, but can be heard by the country, by society. So the role of media is very important because it's media that helps everyone else hear, listen, understand what is going on, what is happening in a situation, what's happening in a Truth Commission setting, for example. While it sounds simple, Truth Commission facilitates listening and acknowledgement. You can do that in radio call show, right? I'll call the radio host, I'll talk about my problems, and then the radio host listens to you. What makes a Truth Commission different is, of course, its official capacity. What makes the Truth Commission different is that it's the state, it's the government carrying it out. It's not a radio program on FM radio. What makes the Truth Commission different is that the law creating it might also lead to other consequences, reforms, specific steps to find the disappeared, as in Sri Lanka, or even possibly prosecutions or amnesties. Next. So the functions of a Truth Commission, it's truth-telling and truth-seeking. But in some cases, transitional justice work, the work I do, also deals with reparations for victims, criminal and civil litigation, and measures that are never again, to try to ensure that the grievances and abuses in the past don't happen again. In some cases, they are symbolic, memorials, apologies. In some cases, they are more material forms of reparations. In 2023, the United Nations issued a document that sort of captures the experiences in the world so far involving transitional justice. Those mechanisms, truth commissions, reparations, civil and criminal cases, institutional reforms, they're based on the rights of victims of human rights violations in the past. So the right to truth, the right to reparations, the right to seek justice, and the obligation of the state to ensure that it never happens again. So this picture here is from a country in Latin America called Uruguay, which was under a dictatorship for decades in the 70s and even up to the 80s. Uruguay was in fact one of the first Latin American countries to have a truth commission. And as a result of that truth commission, several cases of disappearances were resolved in the sense that those who were disappeared were exhumed because they were dead. Victims of the dictatorship that ruled Uruguay were able to testify before the Truth Commission. And so every year they commemorate the establishment of the Truth Commission. Truth and memory, nunca más, Spanish for never again. There's also one more reason why truth commissions may be more effective than courts when it comes to addressing human rights violations, crimes during a conflict, whether an international conflict or a domestic one. In some cases, perpetrators of human rights violations may be dead. If events happened a long time before, you cannot prosecute the dead, or they are unknown. There are certain human rights violations that take place, that are committed away from the public eye, in the dark, literally in some cases. Torture, for example, is committed in detention, sometimes in secret detention. There's no way for the victim of torture in many cases to know who the torturer is. Sexual violence, rape during conflict. In some cases, it's difficult for the victim of rape to know who the rapist is or to identify that person. So there are situations when prosecution is not the appropriate remedy because it cannot be done. Courts in some countries are not independent, or they don't function, or they don't even exist at all. In other situations, evidence is not sufficient. There simply is not enough evidence to prosecute the crime and to determine the guilt of a perpetrator. And yet we know that the crime happened. We know that there is a victim. We know that the victim is still suffering. And yet we cannot prosecute. We cannot establish guilt because that's a different level of proof required to punish, to determine the guilt of a person. What is the alternative to that? In other instances, not all victims are recognized. Why? Because not all grievances or human rights violations may be criminalized. Displacement in some countries, you're displaced because of violence, it's not a crime. You're just forced to flee to protect yourself. It can't be prosecuted. So there are victims of displacement, but there is no crime called displacement. In many situations, victims have more urgent needs than just prosecuting or punishing someone else. They want to be heard, they want to be acknowledged, they want to feel safe. Those things you cannot do in court. You could try, but you will be very frustrated. Even in ordinary cases, courts may not necessarily be able to hear every single grievance and resolve every single form of injustice, let alone injustices that take place over 4 decades or even longer. So, a truth commission is a way of addressing those gaps that lead to injustice, but which courts cannot resolve. Let's go next. In many countries, truth commissions have been established not just in response to a dictatorship. I mentioned Uruguay earlier. Not just in response to armed conflict. I mentioned Sri Lanka earlier. Truth Commission to respond to armed conflict. Uruguay, a Truth Commission to address injustices committed during a dictatorship. In some cases, they also address legacies of colonial rule. In Kenya, for example, there was a Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission that was established to address several decades of abusive and authoritarian rule, but they also addressed colonialism during the British colonial rule of Kenya. But they can also be combined. In many countries, you have multiple legacies, right, of authoritarian rule, of armed conflict, of colonialism, because you cannot really compartmentalize history. Right? You cannot say, oh, we only suffered from colonialism, but not this or that. In many countries, they all combine. I mentioned this already, but the third point, truth-seeking and historical clarification needs to be society-wide. They need to be discussions among people in a society and not just in a court between litigants. Right? You're not talking only about a case, you're talking about a wider set of events that may have led to individual human rights violations. That's why a Truth Commission is a better tool to do that. This picture is of a Truth Commission that many of you would have heard of already. The South Africa Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Established as part of a political settlement between the apartheid government in South Africa, the white-led government, and the African National Congress. This group, not just of Africans, black Africans, but of persons of color, people like us, as well as white people who fought against apartheid. For example, this man, the vice chairman of the South Africa TRC, Alex Goring, he was my boss in ICTJ. After the Truth Commission, Alex became the first president of the organization I work in, and he even interviewed me for my job many years ago. So, one of those who opposed apartheid, he later became vice chairperson of the South Africa TRC. The chairperson was Bishop Desmond Tutu, Nobel Peace Prize awardee, one of the most ardent advocates of reconciliation. The South Africa Truth Commission had 17 commissioners. There was a process of nominating commissioners. The public was invited to nominate commissioners. There was a committee within the government under President Nelson Mandela that vetted the nominees, looked at their backgrounds. There were qualifications set in the law creating the Truth Commission, and it was narrowed to several people, and then president decided on who the 17 would be and nominated and named chairperson of the Truth Commission. The TRC, after its creation, created 3 committees. The Human Rights Violations Committee. This is the committee that encouraged the public to submit statements to the Truth Commission. This is the committee that asked victims of human rights violations in the period covered by the mandate of the Truth Commission, which was 1962 to 2004. And they asked the victims to submit statements to the Commission so that the Commission could determine which victims would be asked to testify in public or in some cases in private, depending on the crime, depending on the sensitivity of the grievance. There was a reparations committee to which victims could apply for urgent forms of reparation, and then the same committee would later recommend comprehensive reparations. And there was a committee on amnesties. This was the committee where perpetrators of human rights violations committed during apartheid, whether policemen, soldiers, combatants of the African National Congress, the non-state armed group, could apply for amnesty. Now, it's important to clarify this because some of you might hear that a Truth Commission is a body where someone can tell the truth, like a perpetrator telling the truth in exchange for amnesty. Right? That I'll tell the truth, but you must forgive me and no longer prosecute me. That's a Truth Commission. That's not the case. The only Truth Commission, in fact, that had the power to grant amnesty was the South Africa Truth Commission. No other Truth Commission, after or before that, actually had the power to grant amnesties. So I think it's important to already say that amnesties are not inherently part of the work of a Truth Commission. The law might say so, as in South Africa, but in many other countries, it's not. The focus of a Truth Commission should be listening, hearing, and acknowledging the experiences of those who suffered human rights violations. The focus should be on victims, on those who suffered. Perpetrators can appear. Those who think that they committed abuses can appear. A commission can hear them as well. But the purpose of hearing them is to help understand what victims went through. It's also possible that perpetrators are victims. So let me say that again. It's also possible that life is very complex. And politics is even more complicated. An example of a perpetrator who is a victim. I've done work in Uganda, where there is a rebel group called the Lord's Resistance Army, and a bulk of the fighters of this rebel group abducted from camps, abducted from their villages. They were abducted as children. One of the accused at the International Criminal Court who was recently convicted, his name is Dominic Ongwen. He was abducted by the Lord's Resistance Army rebel group in Uganda when he was 11 years old. Taken to the bush, trained as a soldier, never saw his parents again, grew up as a rebel fighter, but also committed a lot of war crimes and crimes against humanity. When he was charged at the International Criminal Court because he became a top leader of the Lord's Resistance Army, his only defense was, I was abducted as a child. It was hard for me to know right from wrong as an 11-year-old. And I grew up this way, in this army in the bush that committed horrific war crimes. Now, that's the difference between a court and a truth commission. In court, he was convicted, and he is now in jail. There were several victims who testified against him. Families of those he killed, victims of rape of the units he commanded in the Lord's Resistance Army. But in a truth commission setting, that might necessarily be the case. He would have testified both as a perpetrator, if he wanted to, but he could also have testified as a man who was abducted as a child and turned into a child soldier. So that's an example of a victim or a perpetrator having both identities. It's possible that someone can both be a victim of a human rights violation and yet also could have committed a human rights violation. And that's, in court, that might have some legal implications, but in a truth commission, we would want to find out the larger story behind that. How many children were abducted like that? How many of them grew up in becoming rebel soldiers? And how many of them committed human rights violations? And what can we do to prevent children from becoming child soldiers? Right? So you have a wider scope of tasks to do in a truth commission, and that makes it so different from a court. The South Africa TRC held over 2,500 hearings. 23,000 victims submitted statements to the South Africa TRC. Obviously, under apartheid, which lasted almost a century, it's impossible that apartheid only had 23,000 victims. Right? It was a system of racial discrimination that classified people according to their race. So the classification was whites were supreme, and you had at the bottom black Africans, and somewhere in between people like us, coloreds. They issued IDs. They were called passes. And passes were not just IDs. Passes would allow you, a pass would allow you to go into whites-only areas if it said so. But if you only had a pass for black areas, you could only go to white areas if you worked there. At the end of the day, you go home to the black-only area. Apartheid is terrible. Apartheid is not just racial discrimination, but racism as a form of government. And that's what this Truth Commission had to deal with. So imagine, can you sue in court for generations of racism? That really won't resolve the legacy of apartheid. So a Truth Commission was found to be necessary. This is a poster that the Truth Commission posted in various parts of South Africa. At that time, it was encouraging people to come forward and testify or submit statements. So what does it say? Revealing is, so the idea was to encourage people to try to find some healing in this process of truth-seeking. How? By revealing what happened to them. Many of them felt that nobody might listen, or many of them felt that there was shame in the experience, especially victims of sexual violence, for example. So the idea is to encourage people to come forward, for victims to hear from each other, but even for non-victims, those who did not suffer as much, or those who did not suffer at all, to understand that you do not have to suffer a human rights violation to understand what a victim of that violation goes through. That's the idea of a truth commission. To build cohesion, to somehow begin to forge solidarity among victims and non-victims alike. And so that you can, sometimes they say move on. I hesitate to use that phrase because I think moving on might imply that it's easy. All you have to do is take a step. Well, maybe you take a step, but it's not just one step. It can be many steps forward. So let's look at a public hearing and the impact of the public hearing in South Africa. This person was a torturer during apartheid.
To listen to the victims of human rights abuses, to provide reparation, and to grant amnesty. These were the three main tasks of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The scope of the Commission dated from the 1960s right through to 1994, including the Shell House massacre, the murder of Communist Party leader Chris Hani, and the St. James Church attack in Cape Town. While many wanted answers around high-profile killings and disappearances, it was the everyday brutality of the apartheid system that came to characterize much of the hearings. For some, it was all too much. The perpetrators also had to be heard. In planning the Commission, some had argued for a punitive system like the Nuremberg trials, which prosecuted Nazi war criminals. But in the end, the DRC chose a more conciliatory approach. Applicants had to prove their acts were politically motivated and make a full disclosure to receive clemency. Shocking scenes of torture were reenacted for the Commission. ANC bomber Robert McBride and former police hit squad commander Dirk Coetzee were both granted amnesty. Chris Hani's killers, Janus Wallace and Clyde Darby Lewis, were not. But many chose not to apply for amnesty, among them high-ranking former government officials. Apartheid-era chemical warfare expert Dr. Wouter Nausori was one of them. He later went to trial, but the state found insufficient evidence to convict him. The Commission formally ended in 2001. Of the more than 7,000 amnesty applications, less than 1,000 were granted. And the matter of reparations continues to be a bone of contention for many victims. While not perfect, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has been used as a model by other countries seeking reconciliation.
In the other countries that the video mentions, it's true that they refer to the South Africa Truth Commission as an example of what it could look like. But I am also hesitant to say that it should be the model. It can be a model, and a model in the sense of knowing what went right and what went wrong with the Truth Commission in South Africa. One of the things that we know went very right about the South Africa Truth Commission was the way it engaged with the public through the media. The most important public hearings were held live, covered live, and the various public hearings in other cities and municipalities in South Africa were recorded and then summarized in weekly Sunday end of the week broadcasts where a host invited guests to discuss what transpired at the Truth Commission that week. And it went on for, I think, over a year, every week. And it helped a lot because obviously not everyone can literally just show up at the Truth Commission. You may not be living in the capital. You may be living on another island. It may be very difficult for you to travel. Maybe you cannot afford it. Some people may not even have heard that there is such a thing as a Truth Commission. In the Solomon Islands, for example, and you know that the Solomon Islands are like your islands, distant, difficult to reach. I remember going there for work, and the person who was helping me locate, people to meet, said that he had never been back to his home island because it took a month. There's only there's a once a month trip, and if he did that, he would only be able to go back a month later. So how about his job? So that distance. So what that Solomon Islands Truth Commission did was to, it held hearings in Honiara and in two other major cities, major towns. But for the islands that could not be reached, or for people on those islands who could not go to Honiara, what the Truth Commission did was to actually get a large boat and go to the islands. The Truth Commission goes to the public on a boat, holds hearings by the shore, instead of making people go to some big building in a ceremony. So the idea is that this is not about some grand big event in the capital. This is about bringing this exercise in listening across the country. So hearings can be held outside the capital. Hearings can be held outside hotel rooms or convention centers. It can be held in a public school or in a church where people can gather, where people are safe, where people can feel that they will be listened to. So that's an important consideration. And exit. I'll mention a little bit about this. In other countries, while there are many victims of different human rights violations, many of those victims are victims of abuses or human rights violations committed by one group. But sometimes, there are victims of another group. So, Lebanon as an example, there are many communities in Lebanon, ethnic groups founded on religion. There are Shia Muslims, Hezbollah, as you've heard of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a Shia Muslim group. There are Christian phalangists, non-Catholic Christian groups. There are Sunni Muslims, not Shia. There are Baathists, another group. So there are so many groups in Lebanon, and many of them for a time had their own armed groups. And so during the Lebanese Civil War, it wasn't just one side against the other, multiple sides committing different violations against civilians belonging to other communities. So while we can talk about human rights violations, in Lebanon, there were different perpetrators came from different groups. It was difficult for families to simply unite as one group and say, we want a Truth Commission. So it's been a difficult process in Lebanon to have a Truth Commission. And yet, they were able to finally establish a unified commission to look for the disappeared in Lebanon across all ethnic groups. Why? Because they're united around the fact that regardless of your religion, regardless of your faith, you want to find out what happened to your disappeared family member. You want to know what happened to your disappeared husband or wife or son or daughter. Regardless of what you believe in, which God you profess to have faith in. Right? So this type of unity can happen because there are common things that people want to find out. They want to know the truth, regardless of their political or religious beliefs. Next. Next. And truth commissions can also go beyond human rights violations. And it's important for truth commissions to go into the root causes of those violations. Why were those violations committed? Why was there a conflict? Why was there a long period of dictatorship? Who allowed it to happen? Who supported the dictator? Who gave the dictator money? In Liberia, the Truth Commission examined the relationship between warlords and mining companies who armed those warlords. In Timor-Leste, they looked at the 25 years of Indonesian occupation to see why it lasted that long. In fact, in Timor-Leste, one of the most important findings of the Truth Commission, and very often in the work I do, a lot of people omit this fact or pretend that it's not the fact. The Truth Commission found that in 25 years of Indonesian occupation of Timor-Leste, 108,000 people died. 25 years of occupation by Indonesia in Timor, 108,000 people died. That fact alone is important. But they also found out that of the 108,000, only 20,000 actually died in combat, in armed encounters, in shootings, in killings between armed groups. What about the 80,000 plus people? How did they die during the occupation of Indonesia? They died of hunger. They died from lack of access to health care. They fled to the mountains during frequent Indonesian raids of their villages. They could not access hospitals because they were perceived as supporting the rebel group that later on became the government of Timor-Leste. So, this type of truth-seeking, which is not necessarily about an individual's case or a family, but about a larger group of people, is also an important role of the Truth Commission. It aggregates the facts to tell us a story, to give us a larger picture of what happened, to tell us what the root causes are of those abuses. In Tunisia, the question was asked, how did the dictator, his name was Ben Ali, how did the dictator manage to rule for so long and enrich his family through corruption? And one of the findings was the World Bank and the IMF, International Monetary Fund, kept lending him money, knowing how corrupt he was, knowing that he would just use the money to enrich his relatives. They gave him money because he was following their economic prescriptions, and they wanted to show that, look, we're a model for the World Bank's economic policies, ignoring the corruption and human rights violations he committed. This is the Truth Commission of Tunisia, and let's run the video and then we'll end. I'll show you a video of this Truth Commission conducting a public hearing. This is more recent. This is from 2015, and I was there personally.
President Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali ruled Tunisia for 24 years, and Aston knows more than most how harsh his rule was. Her father was a political prisoner who was tortured in jail. That abuse led to severe mental illness. When her father was released, he couldn't recognise his wife or 3 children. He committed suicide 21 years ago.
The truth has to be revealed. His life is precious. They killed him mentally and physically tortured him. His doctor said his mind had burnt. He could not tolerate what he had been through. I need the truth and justice for him.
The Truth and Dignity Commission in Tunisia is investigating human rights abuses from when Tunisia gained independence from France in the 1950s until the revolution in 2011 when Ben Ali was ousted. One woman told the commission how her son was shot and killed by security forces during the 2011 uprising.
One day the boys were out together. They were in their prime, around 27 years of age, and a few of them got together to demonstrate. On the 9th of January 2011 at 10 a.m, the first shot hit my son.
More than 62,000 complaints have been filed since the commission was set up 3 years ago. They include rape, torture, arbitrary detention, physical abuse, and violations of freedom of speech.
Finally, people do have a public voice, but it's whether this public voice will actually continue and be supported, or whether this actually just turns out to be another show and then ends up in a disappointment.
Ben Ali fled to Saudi Arabia on January the 14th, 2011, following an unprecedented mass protest movement calling for an end to injustice, oppression and humiliation. The final public hearing of the Truth and Dignity Commission is due to be held on January the 14th next year to commemorate the thousands of victims of what many say was a brutal dictatorship. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera.
So I'll end here by mentioning that yesterday at Labasa, some of the reporters from here asked me, will a Truth Commission work for Fiji? And of course, that's because you have to write the story, right? It has to be 3 paragraphs, and one of the paragraphs has to be, yes, a Truth Commission will work for Fiji. But of course, I did not say that. I do not know what kind of Truth Commission Fiji will design. I'm here to help you understand other Truth Commissions and how they were designed, and perhaps what can be borrowed or what should not be borrowed from them. I am not here to tell you how many commissioners you should have or who should they be, let alone whether they will be successful in listening, hearing, finding the truth, and giving Fijians some measure of justice, no matter what that might look like to different Fijians from different periods of your past. And that's not a very quotable part. It's long, it's unwieldy, but really, I think it's important for journalists and non-journalists alike to participate in what a Truth Commission for Fiji might look like. So let me end there. Thank you.
Bearing in mind it's not a fixed draft yet, it doesn't have, but it's there, and at the end, if you have any comments, we'd welcome them. So I'll just take you through very quickly. So the draft legal framework is about 19 provisions, so it's not a very big chunky piece of legislation, but it's something that could increase, and we could go into more, or we could reduce it at the end of all these consultations. And it's into 4 parts, which are outlined there. The preliminary part, the work of the Commission, and then the end of it, which is the miscellaneous, which is schedules and codes of conduct in it. So we're straight into the provisions. So the first one talks about the name. It names the Commission, and Fiji Truth and Reconciliation Commission. If you have any ideas of what you think could be suggestions for it, please share them, but we'll put it at that. And as well this morning from Mr. Ruben, you have different countries named different things according to what they thought it was, or captured best their unique circumstance. So that was a very good intro. You even heard that one use the language, used their language and converted it into calling it Fiji Truth, Truth and Reception Commission. So that's something. There are others that have a Truth and Dignity Commission. Others called it Truth Healing Reconciliation Commission. So you see various variations of the name, but for these purposes we left it at that. But of course, if anyone has a comment, you can share that later. So that's the first one. And then in the interpretation section, we put the terms that we've used that are common in the bill or in the provisions, and we try to put a little definition on, so when any person opens it up, they can quickly look at it and understand what it means. One of them is civic education. So this means programs of education conducted by governmental or non-governmental bodies to enable the people of Fiji to understand the nature and the work and the role of the Commission. So why would this happen? So in the course of the bill, while the work of the Commission is happening, one of the things it says is that bodies outside of government, CSOs, or even bodies within government would have this task of building awareness on the work of the Commission, either at the time now or when it is set up. So the civic education is really to promote the understanding for those who may not be quite sure what it is, the work is it, what the role of it is, the objectives of it is, the purpose of it. So by the time the commission sets up and go to its work, the community has an understanding. So the time period, this of course is a simple little example of civic education. Of course it's more a consultation, but it's already starting the conversation and the knowing about it and the work and already generating questions around it. But the civic education here that we're thinking of is a more structured one, and that'll roll out, say in about this, probably in the time period of about now till December, or maybe in the first 3 months of when the commission work is set up. The commission itself, of course we know what that means, it's the body that's set up to do the work. The periods, what's the period that it's looking at? The periods that we have there have the periods of the past political upheavals, and we've gone to 1987, which was our first official coup, and then we've opened it to the period up to date. So it covers any of those periods from 87 till now. Already in the last 2 weeks, we've heard comments from people on that, what they think that the period should be. Some have made suggestions to go even earlier, but some have suggested, to go up to date. But that's something that you might want to also, if you have comments, you can raise that as well. Fijian, of course, citizen of Fiji. Reconciliation process is quite clear. This act or the process of coming before the commission, telling your testimony, testifying, sharing your truth, and any acts after that in terms of apologies or traditional apologies or any acts that happen and that is facilitated by the commission under this act. So we also looked at the term survivors, the victims or survivors. We chose to put survivors, but it really is the people who individually or together suffered harm, whether it be physical or mental or emotional suffering or trauma or loss to their property even as a result of some of these political acts and experiences encountered during that period specified. Yeah, and this could be people in Fiji, all of us here, or maybe some who also moved abroad and are settled there now as a consequence of those times that when it happened. So, and this will not just be for one person, but it's relatives or dependents as well of the survivors. So it's not limited to one person. The purpose, in the purpose, we promote there, or we put there, and of course you can have comments if you want to, but it's really the aim of the purpose and the function of this is to promote social cohesion through healing and reconciliation. Secondly, to facilitate open and free engagement in the truth-telling exercise regarding our political upheaval since 1987, with the aim to bring about closure and healing for the survivors of these events. And this morning you heard Mr. Rubin flick through and show examples of how other commissions worked and what their purposes were and what their styles looked like, but also what they were trying to achieve, not just in the short term, but middle term and long term. So those pictures kind of gave an idea to us what there's. Of course, recognizing that the Fiji experience is unique, something tailored, we would like something tailored to our particular consequence while looking at the other experiences, but we also like to tailor this one to match our own unique circumstances here at home. So the establishment, so this section sets it up. It says how many people will sit on it. At the moment, the thinking is 5. The 3 of them have been nationals of Fiji. And the chairperson is to be a person that is appointed by the president and also the members of the commission. So when it's set up to do its work, whether it's a commission of 5 or a commission of 3, it will be appointed by the president. And the members of the commission who we're thinking of is people of very senior standing, distinguished citizens of ours who are also have served our country, but as well there could be a chairperson who may be someone not from here, but that's still in conversation. But people generally who are quite senior, mature, have served for great length, and who have competence and experience in these areas. So the professions or the competencies are quite a range. You don't have to be fixed in a particular discipline or area, but you know, it's open to people who've done work in the humanities, psychology, transitional justice, working in the conflict, working in the community, people in our churches, as well as from faiths. But people, a whole spread of wide skills, people who've had experience of life. So those are the people we're looking at as well. So the chairperson would be the head of the commission, guide the commission, run it in its work, help map out where they're going to be and what time, and also an outline towards their work program. So the functions of the commission, this will look again, like I said, social cohesion, somebody who could help bring about facilitating, enabling spaces and an environment that allows survivors to come forth, to feel comfortable, to share their stories and experiences in trial. Those are the functions of the commission. Also to be able to have everybody around or under in a room. Also to, as we saw in the slides before, when Mr. Rubin showed, ask questions. Right? Do work that is related, not be afraid to ask questions, to go back in time, ask questions, not fixed questions, but questions that relate and go back and address root causes. Why is this happening? Why did this violence happen? Try and understand it. So that the commissioners would have that broad latitude that they could ask this range of questions to be able to understand. Also, it's a person's experience coming before the commission. And in doing so, address accountability for the human rights violations or abuses which occur during the specified periods. Also, the functions of the Commission, again, in doing this platform or creating this platform, move towards or be able to move towards and address social accountability for acts done during those periods. Meaning, social accountability meaning perhaps if somebody wants to make an apology and one group wants to do one to another group because they felt that they could bring closure to that particular incident that happened. This is one of the functions that the Commission could encourage and facilitate. And we all know in our pockets of our communities, we all do apologies in our traditional forms. Whether it's in the Fijian community or in the Stana community, all of us have a way of a mechanism of seeking forgiveness or doing acts towards each other, where to improve and mend relations or acknowledged hurts. This commission will also allow that and promote that to happen as part of its work. So attached to the actual commission, the people who will be sitting there, you will have a unit of support services or the admin staff or secretariat staff, and in there you'll have somebody who is trained in giving faith-based or pastoral support, somebody who is a trained trauma counselor for people who may require that at the beginning, the middle, or the end. They may need that support when they're coming forward or making a submission, or during and while making a submission, because we recognize that it's not an easy thing for people to come forth. Also translators for those who might be coming, our villages, our communities who are out there who speak, to enable them if they're having any challenges, but also to have somebody in Fijian and Hindustani, in all of vernacular, to assist the groups, so they can present, and not only confined to speaking in English, but they can present in the mode that they are comfortable with. So that support will also be part of the Secretariat, as well as those from our disability community who may have difficulties with the communication, a sign language interpreter to allow them to also communicate and share what they may also want to before the Commission. So that support will be attached to the Secretariat behind the people sitting as commissioners. Of the functions, can we flick over the slide, next one? The powers. What were some of the things that the powers the Commission would envisage to have. So we're thinking of to allow them to do their work, the commissioners, also allow them to be able to issue summons perhaps in instances where they need to ask for more books, ask for more plans, to get more documents or more information, to allow them to ask questions or to clarify a particular incident. And that includes asking people to come and verify a particular thing. So we've put that as well in there. On to 8. We are also put a provision in regards that every section or every arm of government be able to cooperate with this independent body. That while the body is independent and be doing its own functions fearlessly and independently, if it also sought assistance from a government department, for the government department to be able to assist, to be able to let the mandate of the Commission run unhindered or uninterrupted. So to basically cooperate. In 9, this is more to do with the procedure, how many people need to fit the quorum, how many to be able to sit and to be able to work. So we've put there, if there are 5 people, if there are 3, the quorum for meetings of the Commission is 3, including 2 Fijians. So if it's 2 Fijian commissioners must be there. Also, the Commission must be doing its work when it arrives at decisions, do it by consensus. So if there are 3 of them, they arrive at a consensus, or if it's a 5-member group, then they also make their decisions when they do their work through agreement. So that's a provision there. We also have the one about asserting the Commission's independency. That's very important, because although it's being an official one set up by government, but government itself will not be controlling it. The people who are coming and selected are doing it and exercising the independent judgment, and required at the end of the 18-month final report, at the end of the 18-month process, while hearing also the Commission and doing truth-telling, but also come up with recommendations at the end that would impact on our education and our health, and basically to make solid recommendations to the state so that this doesn't happen again, like recommendations towards the future. What can we do to rectify where we are? How can we improve our education system? How can we provide more support? Like Mr. Ruben said, the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission not only is there to do its work, but it opens doors to other things. These doors could be reform or recommendations leading to reform. So that's towards the end of that. And then now we'll talk a bit more about who will work at the Secretariat. Like I said, there'd be commission and there'd be the work people as part of the Secretariat to make sure that it runs effectively.
Sorry, I'll just be seated here so you can have a look at the screen clearly. So basically the Commission may appoint staff, and this may even look like the employment of services from the existing government or parliamentary staff. The Secretariat will be managed by the Executive Secretary, acting under the guidance of the Chair of the Commission, and the Commission may also engage consultants with specific expertise that is related to the functions of the Commission. This next provision deals with the responsibilities of commissioners, and the conduct of the Commission. So the Commissioners and Executive Secretary must respect the oath of office that you would find in Schedule 2, and they must be politically neutral. The same for the staff and consultants of the Commission, they must also be politically neutral. The Commissioners must individually sign and adhere to a Code of Conduct, which is set out in Schedule 3. Furthermore, in this same provision, any breach of this Code of Conduct is enough basis for formal warning for either a removal from office in the case of a Commissioner, a termination of the contract in the case of a directly appointed staff or a consultant, or a termination of secondment in the case of a seconded government officer or parliamentary staff. An action may be instituted in the case against the Executive Secretary, staff or consultant of the Commission, by the chair or with the support of at least one other commissioner. And if in the case of against a commissioner, it will be by the chair and at least two other commissioners. And in the case of an action against the chair himself or herself, by two or more commissioners. Also, a commissioner who is absent without good reason for more than 3 consecutive meetings is enough basis to be removed under the procedure prescribed, as mentioned earlier. And any person accused of breaching the provisions of the Code of Conduct will also be given the benefit of natural justice before any action can be taken. With respect to this next provision, 13, this provides protection for the Commissioner and the Executive Secretary. So this provision ensures no legal action will be initiated with the evidence that the Commission receives. So the Commissioner or Executive Secretary will not be liable for anything done or said in respect of any matter or things said or done or omitted to be in good faith in that person's capacity as a Commissioner or Executive Secretary. Furthermore, no evidence that is heard or taken under this particular framework is admissible against any person in any civil or criminal proceedings whatsoever, except in the case of a person who may be charged with intentionally giving false evidence before the commissioners or intentionally misinterpreting the evidence in a manner that is intended to mislead the commission. Also, a misinterpretation will be considered intentional if there is evidence of an intent to mislead or distort the truth, or the misinterpretation occurs in a context where the person had knowledge or reasonable grounds to understand the correct interpretation. A person can also be liable for anything that is said which is irrelevant to the work of the commission. A person can, or that is said maliciously within the meaning of the law of defamation. A person can also be criminally liable for any statement made that constitutes an offense under any law, which is an abuse of the occasion being relevant to the work of the commission. And here the burden of proof will then lie on the prosecution. Furthermore, an unintentional misinterpretation of evidence will obviously not constitute grounds for legal liability, but it will be subject to educational measures, including clarifications and rebuttals during the proceedings of the Commission. This next provision deals with the commencement and terms of operation for the Commission. So the Commission must commence preparations for operations within 14 days of being appointed as members. They have a period of 3 months to prepare, and during these 3 months they will be doing the following. They can procure their office space if required, prepare a budget, secure funds for the Commission, hire staff, determine a detailed methodology for the reconciliation process, design and undertake a public or civic education campaign on the purposes and procedures of the Commission, design and put in place a reporting mechanism, and undertake preliminary background research. Now the Commission will only operate for 18 months after the preparatory period. And these 18 months can be extended by the President, given that there is sufficient grounds for doing so. Both during the preparatory period and after it commences operations, the Commission must endeavor to inform the public of its existence and the purposes of its work. This next provision talks about the conduct of the hearings that the commissions will conduct. So the Commission must ensure that its work of hearing the stories is alongside the civic education. This is to ensure that the public has a good understanding of the reconciliation process that we had mentioned earlier before they come in to share their stories, their experiences, and their trauma. Also, the Commission must ensure that they give ample public notice before they go and conduct hearings within the locations that they intend to do so. And the Commission must also ensure that individuals can give their views in any language with which they are comfortable. And they can also, they must also ensure that disabled individuals are not hindered from expressing their views by the provision of the sign language interpretation or interpreter, choosing physically accessible premises for their meetings, or assisting that particular disabled individual with physical access to the premises. And from time to time, the Commission may seek assistance from traditional and religious leaders including community and political leaders, to facilitate its public functions. The Commission also, at its discretion, can allow someone to come in and provide information confidentially, and the Commission is not compelled to disclose any confidential information, and they may also hold in-camera or private proceedings as and when necessary. The Commission must also take into account the interests of the survivors and witnesses when inviting them in to give statements. This includes some security concerns and other concerns that the survivors or the witnesses may make known to the Commission. And also the Commission must not name individuals in their events, activities, public statements, report or recommendations, or make use of any of the personal information which they have gathered that will then lead to identify an individual. Unless, of course, the individual has expressed consent given to the Commission, or this information has already been established through legal proceedings or by admission or by public disclosure by that individual. In saying that, the Commission also must implement special procedures to address the needs of particular survivors like children or those who have suffered sexual abuse, as well as in working with child perpetrators of abuses or violations. And the decisions, of course, of the Commission must be taken by consensus, and in the absence of consensus, by the majority vote. Now, this section deals with the final report of the Commission. So the Commission must submit a final report to the President, where it details the work of the Commission, the views expressed by the members of the public, and recommendations for the state's implementation. This report should be submitted to the President within 3 months from the end of the Commission's working period, and if that working period had been extended, then 3 months from the end of that particular extended period. The state must take reasonable measures within its available resources to implement the recommendations mentioned in the final report. And if the state claims that it does not have resources to implement these recommendations, it is its responsibility to show that there are no resources to implement them. Also, the Commission automatically dissolves upon the presentation of this final report to the President, but the Secretariat continues in existence to just solely wind up the affairs of the Commission in consultation with the Chairperson. Now, the records of the Commission, what will happen to them? This provision details what will happen to them. The Commission must keep careful and accurate records of its meetings and decisions. The records of the Commission are to be kept confidential, and this may only be made available to any member of the public who requests access to them, subject only to the reasonable decision of the Commission. This is so that so that they do not jeopardize any ongoing negotiations as to the content of the Commission's final report and or recommendations, and to prevent the disclosure of this information which is not relevant to the work of the Commission and might be damaging to individuals or the cause of national reconciliation that the Commission is trying to achieve here. The Commission members must also maintain professional secrecy and are prohibited from disclosing or publishing the Commission's work other than in the reports and data that they publish. So this also applies to the Commission staff and those working with it, and all Commission members and staff must maintain that confidentiality of all the documents that they receive, data, testimonies, information or materials brought to their knowledge concerning issues falling within the Commission's ambit, and this also applies to resigned members as well. And all these records that this confidentiality refers to is to be deposited at the Fiji Human Rights and Anti-Discrimination Commission. Now, with this provision, we talk about the funds of the Commission. So the funds of the Commission may or can consist of all money appropriated by the Parliament for the purposes of the Commission, all grants received by the Commission for its purposes, all interest accrued from funds deposited with the Commission, and any other resources that will be approved by the Minister for use by the Commission. Also, the government must ensure that the Commission has the necessary financial resources to perform its functions effectively. And this is the final provision. It basically just ensures that the Commission accounts for its funds, property and assets pursuant to the Audit Act 1969. So we had, our director had mentioned a bit about civic education in the earlier slides, and this comes in one of the stages of the process that the Commission must follow. So this is stage 1, that's where civic education would come in. In stage 2, the Commission will then be set up. In stage 3 is where they will conduct their hearings, which can either be public or in camera or private. And stage 4 is the preparation and presentation of the final report to the President. I had mentioned earlier about the Code of Conduct that the Commissioners must adhere to. So this is the Code of Conduct in Schedule 3. And that brings us to the end of our presentation this morning.
Hi, my name is Shayan with the Fiji Times. Just a clarification, who will the chair of the commission be reporting to?
I guess that's not about the Fiji Truth Commission. So in the legislation of a lot of countries that create a Truth Commission, the specification of independence means that the Truth Commission reports to the public. And that reporting is formal. In most cases, at the end of the Truth Commission's mandate, there's a final report. So when you ask who will be reporting to, that's the report, right? The formal document. In some other countries, there have been examples of a midterm report. So in Tunisia, they had a midterm report and a final report. Now again, that's the document that is the report. Perhaps your question is, who are they reporting to? As in, who is their superior to whom they meet and talk? Which is why it's important to distinguish this body in not just in almost, but in all countries. There's no pre-existing Truth Commission, right? You wouldn't have a country that already has a Truth Commission, unlike courts or presidents or ministers of defense. They exist. They're already there. They report to someone. So a Truth Commission is unique in that sense. It reports to the public. Which also brings us to one of the provisions that's important to discuss, funding. Independence is often assured by funding. And so a lot of Truth Commissions prepare a budget, they submit it to the Parliament or the Congress or the body of the state that approves funding. And I've seen situations where politicians try to control a Truth Commission by withholding funding or calling the Truth Commission commissioners to a budget hearing but asking questions about the work of the Truth Commission instead of about the budget. And it's just a dynamic that needs to be addressed. That's why it's important to stress independence. One of the issues about independence actually comes up often comes up in two instances. One is during hearings. If you call Liberia as an example, they asked the president of Liberia to testify. Ellen Sirleaf Jones, the post-conflict president of Liberia, won a Nobel Prize, World Bank official, probably saw herself as above the fray. You can't summon me. They summoned her. And so there was a long discussion over, can a Truth Commission summon a president, an incumbent president, to testify? But the law said yes. And it's one thing for the law to say anyone can be asked to come forward versus a politician or someone who feels that they're so powerful, that they're above any kind of accountability, or at least even just to show off. So that's an important consideration. Even if you legislate, to what extent are you able to enforce independence? The other instance is in the final report. I mentioned that that's the report that we're talking about. In the Solomon Islands, despite the law saying that the report is submitted to both Parliament and the Prime Minister, and the law said that the Prime Minister's office should then publish the report, because the Truth Commission often, it's able to publish the report, like post it on its website, but it's one thing for that to happen versus the office of the Prime Minister or President of the country saying, here's the report, I'm releasing it to the public. In the Solomon Islands, they refused to release the report. It was officially released, the Solomon Islands report. It was written in 2000, I'm trying to remember when I went there, 2008. So maybe it came out in 2007. When was the Solomon Islands Truth Commission report officially finally released? Last year. When there's a new government came in. So this is the kind of situation to look at. Right? You can legislate things, but sometimes the political dynamics can be different.
Parliament has approved the setup of a commission. Steering committee is developing the draft. It goes to the Parliament. Once the Parliament says, yes, this is passed, and there will be a Truth and Reconciliation Commission established, then the President, so it goes out of the government, and then the President appoints the commission. The commission, as you heard, will be independent. That means they don't report, they report to the public, but the chair steers the commission. Just like you have other independent commissions in Fiji. So the chair steers the commission. Then the chair does the work and writes a report and hands back to the president. From the president will give, then from there he gives it to the government to action and so on. So at the moment we are trying, even though government is leading this process, once a commission is formed, it's an independent process. Funding, since Ruben talked about, funding could be a challenge. In this case, it shouldn't be, because the Parliament has already approved and there is budget allocation for the Commission to organize itself. So the government will do everything possible to make sure that there's resources available, and government has made high-level commitment on that. And it has an independent office, and it has its independent staff to make sure that people feel heard, and it is a trusted process.
I hope I'm Mr. Wasia, PCC. I'm the peculiar representative of Nausori. I was appointed by the peculiar council. So I look after the 7 villages around, which deals with community problems, issues. So I'm happy. I'm satisfied with what's presentation done today. What I ask is, I hope PG need this today. It's a lot of issues arise during the past. None of the issues that carries us forward to solve the problem. The problem keep arising day and every day. I'm talking about community. I'm talking about, I've heard mentioning about that reconciliation in a Tokay manner. Still doesn't solve. So I'm looking forward to this commission to come up. And I'm looking forward to see this commission comes up with a trust process. That's what Fiji needs today. Today, as we know, about 70% of the population is a 40 years down. So these people, they are lost with all what's happening. They just look after themselves. They just want to live a day-to-day living. And they don't look for, maybe I'm right, I'm wrong. But sorry on that. But today need this commission, to my understanding and to my knowledge. So I hope that this commission will be installed, because what our things happening, we do have tribunals in Fiji, we do have a lot of organizations that's trying to solve problems. There's a lot I will not mention, I might. But the tribunal, I see the concept of this presentation. It looks like the Itoke tribunal, only 3 members, which does successful, settle problems in the villages, especially dispute of chiefly title. So if this commission comes, it will help the situation Fiji is today. So thank you very much for this presentation and this organization and this. So I'm looking forward as being a representative that this should be installed in Fiji today and to take Fiji forward.
For your sharing. You are right, the younger people generally say that they don't know what happened and they have different versions of it. And it's important they know. I have a question for you. You said making sure that there is trust in the process. What will make the process for you trustworthy?
Trust is a process that gives confidence and can take us forward in all other matters, in all other trusting. Because in Fiji today, we are Christian, we trust God. There's only one God, we trust Jesus Christ. So very basic is where we are today. The trust, we need to trust this God. This commission comes and we have a trust, then it will a way forward to solve the problems and bring Fiji happiness and prosperity.
Thank you for that sharing.
Thank you very much. I'm Kesh Prasad from Kawasan Tenebu. I'm one of the victims of the coup 2000, and I suffered the most, maybe. I don't know how we solve this problem. Just believe in God, because just like said that regarding the thing that church, nowadays we see the support of the things. Everything happened that day was a very, very dangerous one, and it was really very dangerous. And now we are the same spot, but a lot of them, they quitted the place, and I don't know, I can't say much. Thank you very much.
Firstly, I would like to thank the government of the day for coming up with this initiative of establishing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Fiji. And I believe that our country has also gone through a lot in the past. And this is the first time this government has come up with this Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I believe that the primary function of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is trying to seek truth. I think that is trying to uncover the truth about the past. That is very important. And the other important aspect of this TRC is acknowledgement and also validation. That is also very important. Through public hearing, we will be able to acknowledge the sufferings of the victims, and at the same time, it will contribute to the national healing. And I think Mr. Ruben was talking about the national healing. And further, I think this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, once it is set up, then I believe that they will also be recommending for reforms. Reforms can only come when the commission is established, because this commission is going to look into that and then make reforms or changes that is going to benefit the whole of the country. And moreover, I think this Truth and Reconciliation will try to help the societies transit from divided or conflict-ridden societies into a more justice or into a more just and peaceful future. That is what the basic aim of this Truth and Reconciliation Commission is. It's my humble request, that was just a comment about this TRC. It's a humble request about this legal framework. Can this legal framework be emailed to us? Because we have our own groups in our villages where we can discuss this, because everybody will not be able to make it for this public consultation, because many of them are working. Just like today, I think it is quite disappointing to see very few people turning up for this public consultation. And maybe the reason is that majority of the people in the surrounding areas are working during the daytime. And I was just talking to our Honorable Assistant Minister that maybe if this was held in the evening, there would have been a better turnout. And it's my humble request, since I'm residing in Verata, I would like to have a copy of this legal framework, because this is still in the draft stage. And we can go and talk in our villages so that we can thoroughly scrutinize and give our inputs. I think today it was done, I can say, in a rush manner, because we were not able to capture everything that was discussed. So it's a very humble request, if it is possible, or if there is a website where we can access this draft legal framework. Thank you very much.
I take this opportunity to thank every one of you who have come to attend this meeting, despite the short notice that has been given. And I would like to thank each and every one of you for your contribution and all these suggestions that has been provided to the committee. As you're aware, that this is a committee that is the subcommittee of cabinet undertaking this consultation, and following this, as has been alluded to by one of the presenters, this has to be taken to Parliament with the view of rectifying a formal legislation that will spearhead the reconciliation and through the Reconciliation Commission. As everywhere that we have been last week and also this week, there's been a widespread sharing of ideas, and this is not the purpose of why we are here. You want to learn from your experiences, what can be done, to improve social cohesion in the country. We need every one of us, the different races, in this country to be working together and also to be not to be driving the country forward as one. There's been some practice that we have noted that has been done in the past, and we confirm that, you know, by imposing legislation, forcing people to follow certain viewpoints, legislating social cohesion for people to not work together does not work in this country. So we have come up with an alternative. Yes, a way forward for this country is for people to have their views, share their viewpoints, and also to share their experiences on how best that we can work together, particularly the two different races in this country. We have to learn from what has failed in the past. We have to move forward. We have to formulate new legislation that will address some of the issues that we want to be implemented into the future. So once again, on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank each and every one of you for coming today. And if there are any comments, also the committee, you can write over to the committee. There's emails that are there, and please take the emails and share it with your friends so that they can also send their submissions and any comments that they would like to share with the committee. So once again, thank you very much, and